Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're going to talk about my favorite match from every WrestleMania. Now, I'm doing this just a few months after WrestleMania 40, so I thought that was a good number to go back and look at every single WrestleMania and what my favorite match on each card was. I'm not going to go into a deep descriptive explanation of each match. A lot of these matches, most of you people will know. And this isn't necessarily the best match on every WrestleMania. It's my favorite match from every WrestleMania. For the recent ones that have had two nights, we're still going with one match per show. So we're going to have 40 matches from WrestleMania 1 all the way to WrestleMania 40. What my favorite matches are on each individual card. And I gotta say, going up to about WrestleMania 10, it was a hard choice, not because there was a lot of great and memorable matches. There's a lot of hard choices just because they really weren't great matches on those shows, and there wasn't really, well, I can't say there wasn't anything memorable, but you get what I'm getting at. With that being said, we're going to start off with the one that started it all. My favorite match from WrestleMania 1, Hulk Hogan and Mr. T versus Rowdy Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Again, this is a match that basically made WrestleMania what it is. When you go back to that card, there's nothing else really on there that's great. I do like Andre the Giant versus Big John Studd from the card. But other than that, it's really just kind of any WWE show of that era. But this match is special. It means a lot. That's why it's my favorite on that card. I'm going to that from WrestleMania 2. The British Bulldogs, Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith versus the Dream Team of Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake. This was one of those ones I talked about where it was hard to pick a match because there really wasn't any real great matches on the card. This is a really good match, don't get me wrong. It came down to this in the Battle Royal, which if you've seen my videos before, I've talked about how I'm a mark for the Battle Royal concept. I always have been and probably always will be. But this match just happened to win it out because I enjoyed it so much. Moving on to number 3, WrestleMania 3. Macho Man Randy Savage versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. This is probably everybody's favorite match from this card. I don't have to explain why because this match has been talked about ad nauseum for the last 37 years. So yeah, that's why it's on here. Moving on to WrestleMania 4, Randy Macho Man Savage versus the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. This was another one where the matches, while there were some good match-ups, the matches themselves were kind of lackluster, and this was my favorite of the bunch. I love this match. I love that it's the final. I love that it could have went either way. Just a fun match. Moving on to WrestleMania 5, the Brainbusters, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard versus Strikeforce, Tito Santana and Rick Martel. This was a great match, and in a lot of ways this was as close as we're going to get to Tully and Arn Anderson versus a team like the Rock and Roll Express in WWE until the Rockers came in. But Strikeforce was a really good team. Martel and Santana, they didn't last super long as a team, but I thought they were awesome. I really enjoyed this match. That's why it's my pick for my favorite match of that year. Moving on, WrestleMania 6. This one's probably a no-brainer. This is what everybody's probably going to pick. The Ultimate Warrior versus Hulk Hogan. And again, these are two guys that I'm not a huge fan of, but this is probably one of my two favorite Ultimate Warrior matches and probably one of my top 5 Hulk Hogan matches. Something about this match, the spectacle, the match itself is really, really good quality to it. I absolutely enjoyed it. That's why it's on here. And again, this is two guys that I don't actually think that highly of as wrestlers, but I really enjoyed this match. Going from that, WrestleMania 7. We get a repeat offender, the Ultimate Warrior versus the Macho King Randy Savage. I know there's problems with the way that the Warrior won this match and how it kind of made Savage look weak a bit, but I really enjoyed this, and I really think, again, Savage drug a good match out of the Ultimate Warrior, which hardly anybody did at the time. He was all about the spectacle. So this, again, is a good match to me. This is my favorite match of that WrestleMania. Moving on to WrestleMania 8. Bret the Hitman Hart versus Rowdy Roddy Piper. Piper finally makes it back onto the list after a number of years not being on here. And again, this to me was the real start of Bret Hart becoming much more than he was already, becoming more than just the guy in the Hart Foundation and more of a solo wrestler and one of the great technicians of all time. Piper giving him the rub here really made him look special. I really enjoyed this. Moving on to WrestleMania 9. The Steiner brothers, Rick and Scott, versus the Head Shrinkers, Samu and Fatu. This is just one of those matches that is just awesome. The Head Shrinkers are one of them teams that don't get a lot of love historically, but if you go back and watch their matches, they're really, really good. We're talking about two of the members of probably one of the most prolific wrestling families of all time. Probably at this point, the most prolific. I mean, so many champions, world champions, tag champions, intercontinental champions. Every championship in the world that's still active is probably been worn by one of these family members. And the Steiners are probably a top 10 tag team of all time. I wouldn't put the Head Shrinkers in the top 10 tag teams of all time, but they're up there. They're a really good tag team that's kind of not talked about historically, but I love their matches. I thought this was really good. Moving on to WrestleMania 10. This was a hard one because I was torn between two matches. Obviously, the ladder match with Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. But to me, the Owen Hart versus Bret Hart match gets the slight nod over that match, just for the fact that if I go back and I want to watch just one match from this card, that's the match I go back to every time. The Owen Hart-Bret Hart rivalry is one of my favorite rivalries of this era, and I think this is one of the best matches. It's probably the best opening match in WrestleMania history and probably will be for a long time. Moving on to WrestleMania 11, this was one that it was hard to pick one from. However, I do think that Shawn Michaels versus Diesel from WrestleMania is a really good match. It is my favorite one from that card. Moving on to WrestleMania 12, we get a repeat offender, just talked about him a second ago. Shawn Michaels versus Bret the Hitman Hart. Again, this is the boyhood dream match, the Iron Man match. Kind of a bit of a polarizing match. A lot of people don't like it just because of how long it was. But I think it's really good. I really like the drama of it. There is that setback with Iron Man matches, knowing that it's going to go an hour before you get a pin. So do you really have to pay attention to the first 57 minutes of the match? And I get that. But to me, I think these two guys made it look great. I think this is probably, again, one of the better WrestleMania matches of all time. I personally really enjoy it. That's why it's my favorite that year. Moving on to WrestleMania 13, another one that's probably easy for a lot of people. Bret the Hitman Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. The double turn match. Probably the greatest example of a double turn in the history of pro wrestling. Absolutely fantastic match. One that if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend checking out. Moving on to WrestleMania 14. This one's probably where I'm going to defer from a lot of people, because my favorite match on that card is the dumpster match, the New Age Outlaws, Road Dogg, and Billy Gunn going up against Cactus Jack and Terry Funk. And while WrestleMania 14 is mostly remembered as the WrestleMania that Steve Austin finally won the championship, to me, if I go back, again, much like I said with Bret and Owen, if I go back to watch a match, it's this match. And I really enjoy this match. I don't think it quite gets the love it deserves, kind of because what it is and where it is on the card. But I think it's the best match of that night, or at least my favorite match of that night. Moving on to WrestleMania 15. Stone Cold Steve Austin versus The Rock. Look, you knew this was going to be here. Everybody loves that match. I mean, do I really have to explain why it's on here? Moving on to WrestleMania 16. The three-way ladder match, or WrestleMania 2000 as it was called. We have the Hardy Boys versus the Dudley Boys versus Edge and Christian. Again, precursor to the tables, ladders, and chairs matches. Just an amazing match. Set the bar for what they were going to do. That rolls right into WrestleMania 17. Run it back, this time as a TLC match. The Hardy Boys versus the Dudley Boys versus Edge and Christian. Again, back-to-back years, these guys put on my favorite match of each WrestleMania. WrestleMania 17's Gimmick Battle Royal does hold a soft spot in my heart, just for what it is and how they brought a lot of my early childhood favorites back for that match. But, when I'm being honest with myself, the TLC match is the better match and the more enjoyable, even though, for nostalgic reasons, the Gimmick Battle Royal is awesome. Then we move on to WrestleMania 18. Probably a no-brainer. Everybody's going to say the same match. The Rock versus Hollywood Hulk Hogan. And if we talk about spectacle, we talk about a match where the aura of the two men carries a match, we're talking about this match. It's not the technically best match on this list, but there's something about it and something about the way the crowd reacts to this match, and this match being basically two icons going up against each other, that makes it really special. Moving on to WrestleMania 19, Shawn Michaels versus Chris Jericho. Again, just another really great match. Chris Jericho really coming into his own. Shawn Michaels, who had recently returned and was on the comeback trail to his second part of his career. Just a fantastic match with two guys that are probably really evenly matched, and if we honestly talk about it, two of the best in-ring talents in the history of wrestling. Really great match. Number 20, WrestleMania 20. I'm so used to doing my top 10, so forgive me. Alright, elephant in the room, we gotta talk about this guy, but it is still my favorite match on here. The triple threat match, Triple H versus Shawn Michaels versus Redacted, aka Chris Benoit. And if you've seen my videos, you know I don't like giving respect to Chris Benoit because of what he did. If you haven't, he was one of my favorite wrestlers at the time, and if he wouldn't have done what he did, he'd probably still be one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. But you can't really forgive the man for what he did. But if I'm being honest, it's my favorite match from this card still. I really enjoyed it, hence why it's on here. And it gave us that fantastic ending, even though that's been marred now. WrestleMania 21, Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle. We're seeing Shawn get a little bit of run of great WrestleMania matches, and if you notice, his name comes up more than anybody else on this list. So looking back at this, he really was Mr. WrestleMania. But Shawn versus Kurt Angle, again, just like I said with Jericho, this was Shawn proving his greatness against one of the greats of basically the next generation. Two of the all-time greats again. Great matchup. Moving on to WrestleMania 22. Mick Foley versus Edge. Both men have talked about how much this match means to their career. Mick wanting to get that WrestleMania moment that he really didn't feel like he got till this match, and Edge feeling like he needed Mick Foley to really bring him to that next level. Great match. That's why it's on my list. Moving on to WrestleMania 23. Shawn Michaels is back again, this time against John Cena. Again, just another great match with one of the stalwarts of the new generation, going up against one of the guys of the old guard, who's proving himself to still be relevant and still be one of the best wrestlers in the world. Fantastic match. WrestleMania 24, Shawn Michaels versus Ric Flair. You're probably sick of hearing Shawn Michaels' name by now, but hey, I can't deny the fact that the man gave us greatness. This was Ric Flair's retirement match, which lasted about 6 months before he came back in TNA. But this was awesome. The emotion of it, everything about it, just a great match. WrestleMania 25. Here he comes again. Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker. I mean, come on, this is a no-brainer. If you don't love this match, why are you watching this video? Everybody loves this match. This is one of the great matches of all time, which leads us right into WrestleMania 26. Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker. Everything I just said about WrestleMania 25. Add the drama of this being Shawn Michaels' retirement match, and there you go. It's just as good, if not better, than 25. And again, one of the great matches of all time, one of the great WrestleMania matches of all time. A no-brainer for this list and a no-brainer for my favorite match of that night. Moving on to WrestleMania 27. Undertaker versus Triple H. To me, 27 is a kind of bad WrestleMania, and really forgettable other than this match. I think this match salvaged the card a little bit, and the rest of it is somewhat a hype package for WrestleMania 28, which, you know, it is what it is. I think it's the best match of the card, which leads us right into WrestleMania 28. The end of the era match, Undertaker versus Triple H with special guest referee Shawn Michaels. This is one of the two WrestleManias that I've had the privilege of attending live, and this is probably the best match I've ever seen live. I'd put this up there with anything else I've ever seen. Probably Cody and Dustin Rhodes from the original Double or Nothing would be right up there. Shane Douglas versus Taz from Guilty as Charged has to be up there. There's a bunch of old ECW and WWF matches from the 80s that are probably up there as well. But this was easily my favorite match of the night. The Rock and Cena was really good. This match is just legendary in my opinion. Moving on, for the 5th year in a row, Undertaker makes an appearance. WrestleMania 29, Undertaker vs. CM Punk. Again, I just really love this match. How can you go wrong with it? I mean, it's The Undertaker and CM Punk. Are they not going to have a great match? Of course they're going to have a great match. Moving on to WrestleMania 30, I mean, this one's probably obvious to most people. This to me came down to either the triple threat or the single match. And to me, the triple threat just barely won it out with Daniel Bryan versus Randy Orton versus Dave Bautista. I like this match more than the match with Daniel Bryan versus Triple H that happens later in the card, even though they kind of tie to each other. But to me, this is my favorite of the two. Moving on to WrestleMania 31, Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns, which turns into a three-way when Seth Rollins cashes in his Money in the Bank. I thought this was great. I love the fact of the cash-in. Just a great match in my opinion. A great story being told here. Fantastic match. Moving on to WrestleMania 32. Another three-way match. Charlotte Flair versus Sasha Banks versus Becky Lynch. I wish at some point we would have got the four horsewomen in a four-way match at WrestleMania. And this is probably as close as we're ever going to get, with Sasha Banks not being with the company anymore and Becky Lynch maybe retired or determining what she's going to do. I'd love to see it at some point. I don't think it's going to happen, but this was as close as we were going to get. I absolutely love this match. Moving on to WrestleMania 33. This is the second WrestleMania I had the privilege of attending. Seth Rollins versus Triple H. And this match and this WrestleMania, I have fond memories, but I also have bad memories. Not that the card was bad, but my friend Gary and I had got to WrestleMania, got to the arena about 11 a.m. I think they allowed us in at like 3-ish, and it wasn't bad. But then when we get in there, and it was just unbearably hot, and it just drug and kept going and going. This is a WrestleMania that I really think cemented that they needed to kind of look at how they're doing WrestleManias, and I don't think it came for, well, obviously it didn't change for the next couple of years, but still, this was an endurance to be there live. And I know I'm not the only person that said that. My friend Gary said the same thing. We were exhausted by the end of the night. A lot of it too was I had went to the Supercard of Honor, Ring of Honor match the night before, so I went to this with like 2 hours of sleep because I live about an hour and a half from Lakeland, Florida, which is where Supercard of Honor was. So after that I came back home, slept for a couple hours, then was right back on the road to go to Orlando for WrestleMania, which is about a 2-hour drive from where I live. So yeah, it was a long weekend for me, but I really do enjoy this match. It was good. I would say out of the two WrestleManias I've attended, it's my least favorite of the two, but still a really good match on a WrestleMania. I can still say I did go to 2 different WrestleManias, which is awesome. Moving on to WrestleMania 34, Charlotte versus Asuka. Again, just another great match, another great WrestleMania moment. I like the fact that now that we're getting into the 30s, we're starting to get more of that women's revolution, more of that diversity where it's not just a men's match that could possibly be the best match on the card. We're starting to see women get the opportunity to be that biggest match on the card, which in my opinion, this was the best match on this card. Rolling right on to WrestleMania 35, aka Kofi Mania, Kofi Kingston versus Daniel Bryan. I mean, who doesn't love Kofi Mania, even though the story after wasn't so great? Who didn't love this match? Moving on to WrestleMania 36. This was one of the pandemic WrestleManias. My favorite match on that card was the Firefly Funhouse match. Bray Wyatt versus John Cena. Probably my favorite cinematic match of all time. I think this is a great example of what you can do with a cinematic match, with the storyline, and the Boneyard match from that same WrestleMania from the first night also is a great cinematic match, but to me, this is my favorite cinematic match of all time, and my favorite match of that card. Rolling on to WrestleMania 37, the WrestleMania Back with Fans. My favorite match of that is the match from night 1, Bianca Belair versus Sasha Banks. I absolutely adore this match. I think it's one of the great matches in WrestleMania history. I think these two were perfect foes. I think the fact that you could see while watching them just how important it was to them really added to this event, in my opinion. Moving on to WrestleMania 38, we get Steve Austin versus Kevin Owens. Probably not the greatest match in ring, but we're not really watching it for that. We're watching the return of one of the greats of all time. against one of the greats of this time. Fantastic match. Next up, WrestleMania 39. We're rolling into the home stretch. The triple threat match, Gunther versus Sheamus versus Drew McIntyre. This was another one of those cards that it was hard to narrow down to just one favorite match from. But if you watched my videos reviewing 2023, this was my favorite match of the entire year, so yeah, obviously it's my favorite match of that card. Last but not least, the most recent WrestleMania, WrestleMania number 40. My favorite match of that card, Cody Rhodes versus Roman Reigns. Cody finally finished the story. And as absurd and as overbooked and as crazy as the finish was, I still love it, and it was still awesome to see that. As a Cody Rhodes fan and a longtime Dusty Rhodes fan, seeing that full circle moment really made it special in my opinion. With that being said, that's my favorite match from every WrestleMania up until this point. Let me know what you think. What are your favorite matches from WrestleManias? Yeah, like I said, it doesn't have to be the best match, just your favorite. Hit me up down here in the comments. If you think I'm totally crazy on one of these, like let's say for instance, you hated WrestleMania 12, Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, or WrestleMania 27, you thought The Miz versus Cena was better than Undertaker versus Triple H. Let me know down here in the comments, and that's just a couple off the top of my head. What's your favorite WrestleMania matches? While you're there, smash the like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't, all that good stuff. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and you've been watching Heel Heat.